Configurable Parameters Implementation Working Group. My name is Isabella Nicosia, representing stakeholder engagement, and I'll be facilitating today's meeting. I also have on the line with me Osman Thomas from our market validation group and Tobias Steckel from short-term forecasting, who will be providing some information later on during the presentation. So before we get started, just a couple housekeeping reminders. Today's call is being recorded. The recording is for informational and convenience purposes only, so any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. This working group is intended to stimulate open dialogue and engage different perspectives, and while we welcome your feedback and comments, just a reminder to keep the comments professional and respectful. We will be pausing throughout the call today. Everyone is automatically put on mute when joining the call, so if you want to raise a question, we'll have designated times for Q&A. You can raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon, which is located at the bottom of your screen, and then the event producer will unmute your line. You can also submit your questions or comments through the chat, and we'll be monitoring that as well today. All right, so our meeting agenda. So today we'll be covering the purpose and goals of the DAME implementation working group. We'll go over the schedule and milestones, and then the actual DAME configurable parameters and the testing approaches for each of the parameters. And then we have a bit of an update on imbalance reserves, and then we'll leave some time at the end to wrap up and go over next steps. Okay, so the purpose and goals. So this section will focus on the purpose of the implementation working group and then details of the implementation working group. So what is a implementation working group? I know this is the first one that we've done, so we wanted to provide a little bit more information and clarity on what it is exactly. So the purpose of the implementation working group is really to gain participant feedback on specific issues pertaining to a project's implementation. And so these issues can cover business process options for interaction with the ISO, feedback on technical information before final decisions are made, options for parameters used in calculations, and other options that match approved policy implementation. I will note that the implementation working group is an optional step in the project implementation, so not all projects will have one. Whether or not one will occur will be communicated through the release user group, that form. So on the flip side of that, what is an implementation working group not? So the implementation working group is not an area to further discuss approved policies or tariff language. The goal is really to gather feedback on final process or system changes so that participants can have a better understanding of how project implementation will perform much sooner than market simulation. It's also not the release user group, which provides project planning and tracking information. It's not the technical user group, which is primarily used to brainstorm and evaluate solutions for technology and process-based problems for the ISO's development of prioritized technical roadmaps. And then it's not a settlement user group, which usually discusses settlement-specific topics and has a specific user base. So if we move to the next slide here, so as part of the effort to implement the DAME initiative, the ISO committed to facilitating an implementation working group. And so the purpose of this session is to provide an overview of the overall plan for the DAME parameters implementation working group. And it will be focused on the 5 different parameters that were in scope of the Day-Ahead Market Enhancements Initiative. So today's meeting is really just to outline goals and the process itself, as well as cover the different testing approaches for the parameters. And then we will have more follow-up meetings in Q1 of 2026. And then additionally, there will be a separate effort that will assess the methodology that will be implemented for the calculation of the imbalance reserve requirements. So I'll stop there. I see we have a hand raised, so maybe now's a good time to pause and take questions.
Hey, this is Michelle Fida from the Energy Division at the CPUC. Do you really mean the next meeting is going to be held in Q1 of 2026, or do you mean Q1 of 2025?
Yeah, so I believe we still are planning to have the meeting in Q1 of 2026, and maybe do we have Mohan Koya on the line too? We'll be going over the schedule and milestones too that will hopefully provide some clarification on that.
Okay, and then in addition, you say that there will be a separate effort to assess the methodology for the imbalance reserves. Do you have any color on that, like when that might occur?
Yep, so that is also included in the working group schedule that we'll cover here in the next couple slides.
Oh, okay, somehow I didn't see that. Okay, thanks.
Looks like we have another hand from Lindsay.
Hi, Lindsay Schluckaway from NV Energy. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I can.
Okay, great. I was just wondering about the overview for the overall plan. Are we going to have an ability to be able to provide feedback on the parameters and have kind of a discussion in this process, or is this just kind of an update?
Yes, so we do have an open comment period. So that comment window will stay open for 4 weeks following today's call, and we have the template posted out on the DAME initiative webpage. So you will have the opportunity to provide feedback on the parameters and the testing approaches.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. So I'll move into the schedules and milestones, which will cover the implementation working group schedule and then also the schedule for market simulation. But first, just wanted to show how this process fits into the larger California ISO policy initiative stakeholder process. So we've gone through the proposal development stage and the decision stage receiving FERC approval. So now we're here at implementation and kicking off these implementation working groups. So in terms of the current proposed implementation working group schedule, you'll see here on these swim lanes that we are at the first stakeholder meeting that focuses on the 5 DAME configurable parameters tuning. And then really between now and like the June timeframe of 2025, we'll be doing testing for the imbalance reserve requirements. And through that process, there will also be a few stakeholder meetings. So we have those planned out here tentatively. Of course, the firm dates will be communicated through a notice in the daily briefing and posted publicly there. But between now and June of 2025, that's when the testing for the IR requirements will take place. And then picking back up in June of 2025, we'll begin market simulation for DAME and parallel ops. So parallel ops will take place for DAME in January through March of 2026. And then for the DAME configurable parameters tuning, we'll do the basic analysis and map stage from June to December of 2025, and then do the fine tuning and parallel ops from January to March of 2026. And then you'll see here that we have those next stakeholder meetings tentatively laid out for January, February, and March. And again, those dates would be communicated publicly through a notice in the daily briefing. So we see a couple more hands.
Good afternoon. This is Chun Yu from PG&E. Yeah, I have a few questions. One, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So from this schedule, looks like the first meet, which is today's first meeting. And I think my question is similar to Michelle's. So since September 4, you're going to actually get feedback from market participants about this meeting, about the content that you're going to present. And will there be a follow-up meeting to discuss the feedback you receive and whether there's going to be a direction change or any updates between now and 2026?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot of it will be dependent on what kind of comments we receive. So if there is a call for another meeting, then we are definitely open to that, but it will be, based on the nature of the comments that we receive on September 4th.
All right, sounds good. And then my second question is, when we first heard about the configuration parameters implementation meeting, we were really thinking, because during the policy phase, I know this is not a policy debate, there are some configuration of parameters further discussion was needed, and then market participants took away from that meeting or several meetings. That will be a chance when come to implementation. There will be opportunity to discuss those subjects that need to have further discussion. So this looks very different than what we initially expected. Will there be still separate meeting to provide opportunity for the discussions where the policy refer of the parameter configuration discussion outside of the implementation?
I may lean on my team for that one. Guillermo or others, do we have any additional information we could share with Chunyu?
Sure. This is Guillermo. Let me see if I understand the question correctly first, because the plan that we are laying out here is regarding precisely the effort for the tuning of the parameters.
Mm-hmm.
The blue swim lane that you see there includes 3 different stakeholder meetings. At least these 3 meetings are going to take place precisely to discuss the merits of the parameters and their value. And the analysis that we're going to be presenting is going to guide a lot of that discussion. But these 3 stakeholder meetings are precisely the reason why they are there, because this is the venue we're going to use to communicate and discuss the analysis and receive the feedback from participants.
I see. So those will come much later. So from the timing perspective, then I kind of have a question about, so how this is going to be happening so late? Whether from the software development standpoint, would it be too late for any changes, since that January, we're kind of entering the parallel operations period?
No, yeah, let me give you some perspective on that.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is that we can do simulation or analyze the performance of the market with these parameters once we have the application in place, right? And that is until effectively the opening of the market simulation. So we're going to use market simulation to see how the parameters, the starting values of the parameters are going to be working. We're going to continue to do analysis even after market simulation to come with what we believe are the proposed final values that we're going to go with parallel operations. So it's the whole cycle of ensuring that we have a platform to be able to do the simulation, and that basically means we cannot do anything until we really have the functionality and the market up and running.
I see. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so we will definitely waiting for those meetings. I don't have any further questions this minute. Thanks, Guillermo.
Thank you for the question.
See a couple more hands in queue, Callie and Alpha.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Actually, the previous conversation hit on a lot of the same questions I was going to ask, but just a couple additional ones. So I just want to make sure I understand the imbalance reserve requirement testing that's going to kick off essentially tomorrow, basically, and be the first phase. Am I understanding that correctly, that that's where you guys are going to maybe be looking at making changes to the methodology to make sure that the requirements coming out of that methodology align with actual realized uncertainty? I'm just trying to understand more kind of what testing, what you guys are looking at in the imbalance reserve requirement testing.
Yeah, and I think we have a slide later on that will cover the testing approach for that, but I know Tobiah is on the line now. I'm not sure, Tobiah, if you have additional information we could provide Callie.
Yeah, and if you're going to cover it later, that's fine. I didn't get a chance to review the slides before this meeting, so apologies if you'll be talking about that later. And then just the second question I had is, during this basic analysis and map stage phase, starting in, it looks like June 16th through December 30th of 2025, I kind of had the same perspective walking away from kind of all the policy discussions, is that we'd have more of a chance to engage during the analysis phase to really provide feedback as to what we think makes sense for the different parameters, because there are some market implications when we're talking about pricing and procurement and all that stuff. And I was curious as to why we're not having meetings sooner, maybe starting at that analysis in the map stage phase, so that if there are things that come up in the policy discussion, we have some time to really think through them and talk about them and figure out what the best starting point is for go live. I'm just a little concerned that if we're cramming in 3 meetings, January, February, and March, with the anticipated go live still in May, that doesn't give us a lot of time to really have those robust conversations I think we were all thinking we'd be able to have in this working group. So did you guys think about having maybe some stakeholder meetings starting in July of 2025 during that map stage testing?
We're open to that, Kelly, but we have to be with some reasonable expectation, because if you look at July 25, to start with, when we open up the market simulation, effectively the first weeks are just to test connectivity and all these pieces that are not related to the market, right? That shortens really the window of really market simulating the solution. So once we have those cases is when we really can go into all this sensitivity analysis, and this is the core, the heavy part of the effort, being able to do all the analysis, all the sensitivities, all the scenarios, all the stress cases, to be able to have a consolidated assessment of how these parameters are working. So worst case scenario, I think it would be towards the end of that swim lane of the basic analysis, but we are open, and if we are able to progress fast enough to have meaningful analysis to share and have an educated discussion, yes, we are more than welcome to potentially go with the discussion sooner than later. This is kind of the worst case scenario where we really have to take all the time to do the diligence of the analytics and the analysis that is needed for this critical piece.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that, and we'll put those in our comments as well. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. If we could unmute Alva's line.
Hello, can you hear me, Isabella?
Yes, I can.
Great, thank you very much. This might be directed more toward Guillermo, because he was sort of getting at the point I was just wanted to ask about, which is, I mean, there's a lot of work that you guys need to do in order just to get the system stood up in a sort of a base manner. But one aspect that I think is at least to be considered in terms of these parameters is that there may be needs to adjust them due to what is discovered in using this system with market participants. And that could be either because new use cases are discovered, or actually in production, new use cases are discovered, or it could even be that you want to develop an approach that is more adaptive in terms of these parameters being modifiable. And I just wanted to find out whether you're going to be considering that as well in the development of this of these parameters. Are you going to view them as essentially hard-coded, which is kind of the way it's implied? You're going to find the best values for them, or are you going to essentially assume that when the system changes, when the resource mix changes, you may need to change the values of these parameters because the values that you've found may cause, for example, infeasibility in the market?
That's a great question, Alva. Let me see see if I can answer this as best I could. I would say there are two kind of efforts. The one that is prior to going live, that is basically what we are covering in this time frame, which is no more than with the final objective to figure out the best starting point values for these parameters. Through the policy discussions, there were some discussions on what the values should be or what the guidance for setting those values should be. We're going to start market simulation with those starting values, like 100% of the proportion or 85% for the multipliers. So these are starting values, right? We're going to assess how they perform on the market simulations. Once we have that, we are going to take the second stage of doing sensitivity analysis, how the solution looks like when you introduce permutation to these values in different combinations, to eventually have this set of parameters that we believe is the best trade-off once all of them are working together. That would be effectively what we want to go with parallel operations, have the assessment now, how it's working all together, potentially tuning those values to eventually have a good set of parameters to go live. Now, that is only the first piece. It's not a matter that once we reach that milestone, we are set and forget, because as a standard practice that we have for any implementation that we do, there is always this ongoing assessment of the market performance. And in some cases, we may realize that we have to do changes along the way once we gain more operational experience and we have more operational data. In some cases, we don't even have operational data until we start running the market. So it's going to be a very organic process. So the message here is that no, we are not expecting to set those values and forget about those. They are going to be subject to further assessment once we go live. And they are configurable. They can be set to different values. They are not hard-coded, such that we are in a hurry to try to make software changes to accommodate variations. This is within the scope of adjusting specifically the values. If all this discussion eventually leads us to a further conversation that there may be some elements of the market design that are beyond the configuration of the parameters, that is also a natural standard process we have once we start assessing how the new implementation is working. These are effectively the two pieces that come together. The effort discussed today is really how we can be as best equipped as possible to come with these values to go live, but they are still going to change potentially in further assessments once we go live.
Thank you, Guillermo. Appreciate that.
Are there any other questions before I turn things over to Oswin to walk through the parameters and the testing approaches? Okay. All right. Well, then I will turn things over to you, Oswin.
Thanks, Isabella. So, hi, everyone. This is Oswin, a lead market analyst from the Department of Market Performance and Analytics. So there are 5 configurable parameters in the scope of this working group effort. The 5 are listed here on the screen. I'll go over them in detail in each slide. So the first one is the set of transmission constraints enforced for the deployment scenarios. Then we have the proportion of the imbalance reserves that are deployed in the scenarios, the envelope constraint multipliers for energy storage, imbalance reserve demand curve cap, and default availability bid prices for imbalance reserves up and reliability capacity up mitigation. So the market simulation will begin with initial values set for each of these 5 parameters. Using results from the market simulation and ad hoc analysis after simulation, we can identify the optimal configuration and performance of each parameter. And because there can be interactions among the configuration of these parameters, we will first assess each parameter individually, and later we'll assess the performance of all parameters in place. So the objective is to identify any needed changes to these initial values that can be then used in the parallel operation. So therefore, in the subsequent slides, we will see the steps outlined below that where we will first set the initial value of the parameter, run the sensitivity analysis with all the other parameters fixed in place, and then finalize the setting of a parameter. Okay. So going to the next slide. So the first tunable parameter is the set of transmission constraints enforced in the deployment scenarios for imbalance reserves. Currently, the available set of transmission constraints include flow gates, nomograms, and contingencies. Initially, all flow gates and nomograms will be activated in the market simulation. This activation will be applied to all the EDAM entities in market simulation to assess the computational performance. The enforcement of these constraints, the flow gates and the nomograms, will allow us to assess whether the imbalance reserve awards are actually deliverable. While all the other tunable parameters are kept fixed, contingencies also will be activated to assess whether there are any additional benefits and feasibility and also software performance to support the setting of enforcing of contingencies. The final set will then be used in parallel operations after market simulation analysis. Okay. Going to the next slide, the second tunable parameter is the proportion of imbalance reserves that are deployed in the deployment scenarios. To begin with, the parameter will be currently set to 1. That means all the IR awards are expected to be deliverable. Sensitivity analysis will be performed to assess the market performance, impacts of varying this parameter. So the varying this parameter will mean that we can change the value to 50 or 75. This will depend on the proportion of the imbalance reserves that are deployed. The final optimized configuration after participant feedback will be used in the parallel operations, as said earlier. The next parameter, or let me pause here. We've covered 2 parameters to see if there are any questions.
Can we unmute Dan's line?
Good afternoon, Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. Just a question on these first 2, but I think it maybe applies out sort of more broadly here. And that's just as we're looking at these and looking at testing, how is the CAISO going to look at the non-California EDM areas versus the CAISO BA when doing these testing and approaches? And I think it probably gets more complex around some of the congestion aspects, but just kind of in general, could you talk a little bit about what you've maybe discussed internally for testing parameters, sort of within the CAISO BA versus more broadly, where kind of the tariff work and business practices and such are still kind of in development?
Yeah, so currently the way we've designed the testing approach is to analyze each area specifically. So we will have teams working on, will be assigned to separate areas. And so we will be analyzing the results individually at a particular EDAM BA level or at a non-EDAM BA level. So.
And maybe a comment then too, as we get into these, I think it'd be helpful too, just since it's been, what year is it? It's been a year and a half or more since we kind of were deep in the policy development on these, to have kind of some, refresher from the CAISO staff that's kind of working on setting this stuff up, just kind of refreshing on the policy, sort of how you're looking at it, whether there's any interpretation of the policy that's being made, so that we can kind of, as a stakeholder and implementation community, make sure that we're sort of on the same page and tracking with you as you're looking at and thinking about these at the same time, and just underscoring that there are maybe some issues to sort through and discuss about how they materialize within the CAISO BA, given your kind of very granular constraints versus within the non-CAISO EDM BAs that maybe have not, had the many years of operating a CRR market and model. And then also just even thinking about the transfer resources between them and how we should be looking at those when it comes to the deployment scenarios as well. So I guess just asking for a lot of additional hand-holding and kind of showing the work in public so that we can kind of come along with you all and be as helpful as possible from the user side.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. We are open to provide the initial discussion, so please add your question in the comments. We will take it back to our teams and respond back accordingly.
We go to Alva.
Hey, yeah, Alva Svoboda, PG&E again. Just in reaction to what, before I ask my question, in reaction to what Dan just said, I think it's a very good point that if you're going to do market simulation, I'm assuming the DAME market simulation will include potential EDAM participants as well, because you really want to test the full, functionality of DAME in EDAM. And so you're going to definitely want to be able to have external participants able to offer or, provide their needs for imbalance reserves and offer imbalance reserves and see the deployment of those reserves across ties as well as just within the CAISO balancing area for a full test of imbalance reserves as they will be realized, on go live day. So I think his point is very valid in terms of making sure that we have robust participation from external participants in that market simulation. The question I had is really kind of a basic one, and I'm hoping you can answer it. But the deployment scenario is the way it's described here. It's entirely a supply side deployment. So it's just ensuring that whatever you do procure in the market process, you can deploy. But what about the demand side of that? Because of the fact that you're using a demand curve, you may not have procured the entire amount of imbalance reserves that, for example, you're using in the RSE process in the morning that you're assuming you need actually to run the system reliably. How would you determine whether that amount, whether there's feasibility to that requirement as part of this process as well? Are you going to, is it enough to simply deploy all of the procured imbalance reserves? And I know, I apologize if this is, kind of more of a not a question really about the parameters, but my understanding, but it just pertains to whether this is actually sufficient for testing deployment of the imbalance reserves.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Alva. So irrespective of whether the IR reserves are awarded fully or partially, you would still like to test whether they are actually deliverable in the transmission system. So that is why we want to enforce it in the deployment scenarios. And regarding your question for the demand curve, we also have slides coming up where we have the demand curve cap also in picture. So if the IR reserves are not fully deployed, then the demand curve will set the price. But in that case, there is partial deployment of IR reserves. We would still like to check whether the partial deployment is transmission feasible or not.
And would it still be possible then that in that case where you only do partial procurement of the requirement, you would not be able to procure the full requirement?
Correct. That is correct. Yeah. In that case, if the procurement is from the demand curve, there will be partial procurement. But even with that partial procured amount, say 60% of IR reserves, we would still like to check whether that is transmission feasible or not.
Certainly. I mean, that makes sense. I just was wondering whether you needed to check something above that really in terms of the interaction between this parameter and the demand curve, whether it would make sense to, essentially leave yourself short in the day ahead market. So just something I was concerned about there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Can you unmute Robert?
Hi, this is Robert Fisher from NV Energy. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, Robert, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Thanks. I just have a real high-level quick question about these parameters. Are they going to be listed in the BPM or the tariff, and the tariff, I should say?
Yes, they are currently listed in the tariff, and I would expect it to be in the BPM for 3 of them.
Okay. So if there are adjustments, then it's going to be a tariff change as we move through this process.
Yes, 2 of these 5 parameters are listed in the tariff with the exact values. So change of those 2 parameters.
As we go through, can you identify which 2 versus
yes.
Out of the 5? Awesome.
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you very much.
It's the last 2 parameters, the 4th and the 5th one.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Lindsay, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Lindsay Schluckaway from NV Energy. I was curious whether or not, I guess everybody would have the ability to test this in the market sim or parallel ops environment, or would that just be Pacific Corp and the entities that would be initially going into EDAM? I mean, do you know if others would have the ability to test this as well so that we could see the impacts?
Oswin, let me try to take that one. That's a very interesting question. Let me take it. So market simulation is really when participants are able to adjust and tune values that they control, right? So effectively, those that are actively participating in the market will have the ability to do that. That said, in addition to the effort of the market simulation, this working group is really trying to go across the board, not only for those that can actually participate in the simulation, but to provide to the marketplace the information and the analysis that we're finding for the configuration of those parameters. So there will be a lot of information, basically summarizing the analysis, the sensitivity, the calibration we're doing for these parameters that is going to be made available to the entire market, not just those participating in the DIM EDAM.
Okay, so we may not be able to participate in the market sim, but we would at least be able to see the results. Is that, I guess, what you're saying?
Yes, the market simulation is very tailored to those that actually have actions to be taken in the environment. And effectively, you have to be a participant to be able to do that. But the results and the analysis of the configuration parameters is going to be socialized across the market for all entities, regardless of the nature of participation.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any.
So we'll continue. So now we're at the 3rd parameter. The next parameter is the energy storage envelope constraint multipliers for IR awards. As the day-ahead market is a forward-looking market 24 hours ahead, the SOC envelope for storage resources needs to be modeled as a constraint in the optimization. In the envelope constraints, IRU awards and IRD awards have multipliers that depict the impact to SOC due to these awards. So that is the IRU and the IRD awards have an impact on the SOC envelope throughout the entire day. The initial value of these multipliers will be set to 85%. Keeping all other parameters constant, sensitivity analysis will be performed and the optimized value will be used in the parallel operations. So why 0.85? This is to start with a high value as discussed during the stakeholder discussions. And this also is a brand new parameter with no operational history. So we want to start near the high end, monitor the performance during market simulation, and then run sensitivity analysis and then come to a final conclusion. Okay. The next parameter is the imbalance reserve demand curve cap. The CAISO will calculate separate IRU and IRD demand curves for each hour in the day-ahead market in both directions for each EDAM balancing area. The imbalance reserve demand curve establishes the price of not fulfilling the IR requirement for a particular hour. The initial value on the demand curve will be set to $55, which is the high end of the range around 80th percentile of historic spinning reserve offers, which the CAISO would otherwise procure in lieu of imbalance reserves. The CAISO determined the imbalance reserves are not worth more than $55 per megawatt hour because we are likely be able to meet the need at that price by procuring an alternative product, that is the spinning reserve. As mentioned earlier, we will run sensitivity analysis on this parameter and keeping all other parameters fixed, and then use the optimized one in the parallel operations. Before going to the fifth parameter, I'll pause and take the comment. Continue.
Yes. Yeah, I have a question here. So notice that first and second parameter or configuration, the language there in the testing approach, one it says keep fixed, one says keep constant. Can you differentiate those and also maybe elaborate a little bit? As the last sentence in the testing approach, yeah.
I think they are interchangeable, Junior. So we had no intention. So fixed or kept constant. So but the message was that while running sensitivity analysis on one parameter, we want to keep the other parameters fixed or constant. Yeah. We do not want to change multiple parameters at the same time to avoid impact of each other.
All right, I'm trying to look at my notes here to see if anything, but it will have the full range of value of the other parameters, just that they're not, while you're trying to figure out this one, you're not changing the other values.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I guess I should just ask a question. So since this is the testing approach, and this is going to be this is going to be the setup on the CAISO side, but the market sim, it's that's a lot of interact testing. So maybe, I'm not sure you will have the details yet. So during those from June to December time testing, and when you set up trying to figure out things, are this going to be visible? Or the scenarios you try to run, it's a visible when we going into the testing? For example, let's say this way you try to figure out whether, this imbalance reserve demand curve cap, that is your focus. Is that going to be sort of like become a scenario or become that way's focus, and all the other configurable parameters will be fixed, and then we were getting the result from the testing? I guess I try to just understand how the communication there and work, and but maybe this just go to the weights and before the market sim.
Yes, we may not have the exact market simulation scenarios right now, but I can give you an example. Say we are currently testing the energy storage envelope constraint multipliers. So we would have 3 scenarios in a week or spanning 2 weeks, where scenario 1 would be to test the values at 65%, and then scenario 2, 75%. So it will be announced as scenarios for simulation provided to participants ahead of time, so that everyone is aware of what the parameters are before testing.
Okay, that sounds good. And then after that, after we'll say that after the 3 scenarios, you do analysis and you have the result. And will those results will be visible or shared with the market participants?
Yes, that will be shared during the stakeholder meetings.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Can we unmute Alba?
Hi, this is Alva again from PG&E. Question about the envelope constraints. So the envelope constraints are going to be implemented in day ahead at the same time that we have for batteries, there might be procurement of regulation, and there might be the use of the attenuation factors to estimate the effect of the regulation awards on state of charge. And of course, those attenuation factors are a forecast that's liable to not be correct. I just wanted to confirm that in spite of that, there would be no, essentially the storage constraints that are imposed on the procurement of imbalance reserves don't have any effect in real time. So essentially, if you have an award from the day-ahead market, it's not protected by any state of charge limitations in real time. The envelope constraints essentially disappear in real time. Am I correct in seeing it that way?
You're correct. So this envelope constraint is specific only to the day ahead, where we are trying to capture the change in SOC over the 24-hour period more accurately using the attenuation factors for the IR awards. So it's only in the day-ahead market.
Okay, thank you.
All right, can we go to Lindsay's question?
Hi, sorry for all the questions. Lindsay Schluckway from NV Energy. I was wondering, do you know what the market footprint will be in this market simulation where you'll be doing the testing? Is it just the CAISO, or will it include any of the new EDAM entities that have signed the implementation agreement?
This will include CAISO and all the EDAM BAs together.
Okay. So is it just the ones that have signed the implementation agreement, though? Trying to get an idea of the footprint.
Anybody from IT, or we can take this question back, Lindsay, and respond later. Yeah.
Okay, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, are there any other questions for Oswin? Okay.
Okay, so we are at the last parameter. The last parameter is the default availability bid prices for IR reserve up and reliability capacity up mitigation. So there will be a new market power mitigation pass before RUC, which will mitigate a bid for reliability capacity up to the higher of two values. One will be the default or negotiated availability bid, and the other is the competitive locational reliability capacity up price. So the first one, the 55 value, is designed to be a conservative value that represents a high percentile value of historical non-RA RUC availability offers. So that is the $55 value that we see here. So, and going back to Robert's question previously, the parameter 4 and the 5 are mentioned in the tariff, the $55 values. So any changes for that will follow the usual process of changes in the tariff. And again, as mentioned before, this is the overall plan for assessing the configuration of all the 5 parameters as part of the dam design. This first call is to provide an overall context of the effort and the timeline. And so once we are closer to the market simulation stage, we will have a better idea of the actual performance of these parameters and then socialize the results with all of you. pause here. This is last parameter. So Kaylee.
Hi, yeah, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, just a couple questions. On the market analysis that you guys are going to do after the testing, are you guys envisioning also looking at the price formation? Because I know that was kind of one of the policy questions that were outstanding when it came to these parameters, as well as the bid caps.
Yes, we do plan to do that as well.
Okay, great. And then the other question I had is, I know you guys said you'll be doing different scenarios when you're testing each of the parameters. Will stakeholders have an opportunity ahead of time to provide input as to that range that you'll be testing? I know you threw out as an example like 65%, 75%, 85%. Is the CAISO just going to decide ahead of time which ones to test, or is there an opportunity for feedback there?
So the starting point is mentioned here in this call. So we do welcome feedback and suggestions. And then once we go through the comments and based on the feedback, we can actually settle on a starting value. These are the initial values that we plan to start with. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then one last question, if you don't mind. So I know you said when you're testing one of the values, you're going to hold all the other ones fixed. But are you going to hold them fixed at different values by chance? Because there is a lot, they're interrelated quite a bit. So I was wondering if we're going to be able to see kind of the impact of those interactions at all. Not sure if you're going to get there if you hold, like for example, if you're testing the bid cap at $55 and you're holding the deployment at 75% and all the constraints enforced for every single bid cap that you test. Or are you thinking about maybe doing different fixed values on the other parameters, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first we want to settle in on try to test each parameter at a time, fixing all other parameters. But once we have an idea of how each parameter works, keeping the others constant, we then have to move towards trying to find the interplay between the two parameters, because there will be interactions, as you mentioned, between one or the two parameters here. So we do want to tackle that. But first we want to get a sense of how each parameter works independently of each other, and then tackle the next question of how they work together.
Okay, great.
So
yeah, just wanted to make.
Yeah.
Okay, glad to hear that's on the plan. Thanks. That's all I had.
All right, let's go to the next question.
Hi, this is Chen Yu from PG&E. Yes, so I guess this my question is when come to before the test, so will you be, for example, like the battery example that you use, so you actually going to document that and actually share with the market participants ahead of time that it's what is going to happen, when it's going to happen, for all the 5 parameters that you're going to test through?
Yes, that is part of the scope and usually part of the market simulation scenarios. So when it's closer to the market simulation, we will definitely share that with you all. So all of these steps will be captured as part of the scenarios in the market simulation.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, can we go to Alba?
Hey, I don't know that this is another parameter, but one thing we had noticed in going through the business requirement specification was that essentially hydro resources, which have a minimum or a maximum energy limit for the day, will be providing both. The assumption in how that's modeled in the market is going to be that the sum of energy and upward imbalance reserves are going to be what the limit is imposed on, rather than on just the day ahead energy. So essentially, if you provide any upward imbalance reserves that will be treated as energy in terms of enforcing the energy limit on a hydro resource. So whereas, for example, currently you might have 100 megawatt hours would be fully awarded day ahead as energy. If you have any imbalance reserves awarded day ahead, they will reduce your day ahead take. Is there been any thought about whether that's appropriate to fully to represent the imbalance reserves as a fully contributing to the energy limit for hydro resources? We hadn't heard any discussion about it and just saw it in looking at the business rule specification, and it seemed that it could really have an effect on the ability of hydro operators to be able to determine whether their schedules would be predictable, or the alternative is that they might have to essentially use that $55 value to say that they're not, they're very averse to having, offering upward reserves, upward imbalance reserves, because they can't manage the uncertainty around that upward flexibility. Just wondering what your thinking is on that.
So it is currently not within the scope of these 5 parameters, but it's outside. But definitely, as part of the overall assessment of the market, we will definitely consider as a simulation scenario. It's a good point where the daily energy limit for resources can be impacted by the IR awards. So we don't categorize them as part of these 5 parameters, but of course we are open to include that as part of the simulation scenarios.
Thank you.
Great.
Yep. Hi, this is Adam Swadley from the Department of Market Monitoring. I just had a quick question for you on the last two. So you noted that the value of $55 is established in the tariff, and you described doing some sensitivity analysis around that. So I guess the first question is, would you be considering values higher than $55? And if so, is there any possibility that the results of those testing of that testing would lead the ISO to propose a tariff change to try to establish a higher value prior to go live?
I'll probably defer this to Guillermo here.
Yeah, thank you, Ashwin. Yeah, that's a very good open-ended question that I think there will be value to assess how things work with values higher than 55. The 55 has some reference, right? There is this economic trade-off between trying still to procure FRP versus relying on other type of service like a spinning reserve. And we landed on the 80 percentile, that is about the $55. As a part of the overall assessment, I think there is value to see how things work with values higher than that. Whether it's going to be clear, obvious that there needs to be a change to the expected value is maybe a different discussion. Given the tight schedule we're going to have, that could be something that potentially may have to be further assessed with actual operational data once we go live. But we are open to suggestions, but we don't want to limit ourselves to say that we are not going to consider higher values. It's a matter whether we have enough evidence and assessment that there is value to pursue something else than 55 in either direction, higher or lower, because the limitation is going to be effectively the same. That in the end is a value that is defined in the tariff.
Okay. Yep. Thank you for that. I want to be clear. I wasn't trying to suggest that it should be higher than 55. I was just, I guess, wanting to clarify if there would be testing of higher values and if there was any potential that there might be a tariff change put forth prior to go live. So anyway, thank you for that.
Are there any other questions? Okay, we'll move on.
I'll hand it over to you, Isabella, from this point.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Austin. So again, we did post a comments template to the DAME Initiative webpage, so that is available now for you. That comments template will remain open until September 4th. So please submit any questions and comments you have through that template, and then we will review and respond to that feedback. And again, depending on the comments you receive, if we need to schedule additional calls, we will do so. So with that, I am going to turn things over to Tobias Steckel, and he'll go over the imbalance reserve requirements. Tobias, go ahead, and you might be muted on the WebEx.
Yes, thanks, Isabella. I am Tobias Steckel, load forecast analyst within CAISO, and I'm just going to give a brief overview of the imbalance reserves component of this effort. So the reason we wanted to kind of put these back to back is just to show the feed in of this process prior to the 5 components, 5 parameters that were touched on before. So really this is super high level, and just kind of putting it out there, and then showing next call that's going to be happening in October, where we're going to be really focusing a lot more on just this particular component. So with that, the broad testing approach that we're going to be taking is within the specified parameters in the external BRS that we can configure for the actual calculation of the imbalance reserve requirement. We're going to be basically trialing that in reference to the initially specified parameters that are in the BRS, and based on the outcome in participant feedback, we'll kind of decide whether or not additional trials are needed. And essentially the outcome of this is to show all these, and then to have this kind of final optimized configuration prior to parallel operations and go live. So as was said before, this next step will be a separate stakeholder call in October. And so that's pretty much the gist of what we want to cover for this component. And we'll take any questions.
Are there any questions on this slide? Okay, not seeing any. Well, thank you, Tobias. So again, just a reminder, comments are due on September 4th, and the template is available out on the DAME Initiative webpage linked here on this slide. And then this slide here just has a list of references for you. So there's links out to the DAME revised final proposal, as well as the DAME and EDM tariff amendment. We also have links out to the DAME BRS, the parallel ops plan, and then the market simulation scenarios. And then just a reminder to everyone that registration for this year's Stakeholder Symposium is now open. We will be hosting a welcome reception on October 29th in the evening at Kimpton Sawyer Hotel in downtown Sacramento. And then the program will be on October 30th at the Safe Credit Union Convention Center in downtown Sacramento as well. So you can register through our event website, which is available here on this page. And then in addition, sponsorship opportunities are also available. So if you're interested in one, please feel free to reach out to us at symposiumreg at CAISO.com, and we will get back to you. But with that, are there any final questions before we conclude the call today? Looks like we have one hand raised.
Hey, Elizabeth, Isabel, is it a due date for register for the symposium?
No, the earlier you register, the better, but yeah, you'll have till October to register.
Thank you.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining and participating, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Conference is now over. You may now disconnect. Have a great rest of your day.